Okay, thank you everybody. Again, my name is Brick. I'm the head of finance at a firm called Entropy Advisors, and I'm here today to kind of talk through the Arbitrum DAO's history, as well as then what kind of lessons can be applied to how to basically build out sustainable revenue without spending out the treasury basically to zero. I guess, in short, just an overview of what Arbitrum is. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Arbitrum 1, but it's an optimistic roll-up. The leading L2 right now, when you look at total value secured, that's around 16 billion. But I guess Arbitrum is much more than that as well. Through the Orbit stack, which is basically Arbitrum's technology that allows anyone to basically build L2s and L3s utilizing the Arbitrum technology. I think Arbitrum DAO, or when it comes to the Arbitrum DAO, it's a notoriously, I guess, active DAO, or has been so historically at least, with around 230,000 delegates right now. And actually, just this week, we passed the 70th on-chain proposal, but yeah, there's been over 300 or so off-chain proposals as well. And short introduction on Entropy Advisors, we basically got funded with a grant through the Arbitrum Foundation and have been working with the DAO since the beginning of 2024. Right now, we're in a 2-year exclusive contract with the DAO, so we're basically fully DAO funded and fully work with the DAO. In the beginning, when the DAO was a bit more, let's say, chaotic, we did quite a lot of different things, but right now we've gotten to kind of put our focus more into our core capabilities, which are basically data, treasury management, and finances, incentives, as well as something that we call special projects, which is basically kind of BD and partnership type of work. So I guess as a short introduction of like the Arbitrum DAO's formative period, I think when the DAO was formed, the Arbitrum Foundation kind of deliberately took a step back and took a more of a passive role, meaning that there wasn't kind of any core figures or, so to say, core drivers who would have like been spearheading the DAO side of things, which then led to a lot of different like contributors coming into the DAO and starting to push forward their own initiatives. I guess the kind of friction that came about from that was that all of the initiatives that were pushed forward were kind of operating in their own silos. And a lot of the kind of contributing people were doing so with like overlapping mandates and tasks as well. So it was quite a messy time back then. And because of like programs back in the day used to run for like, let's say 3 or 6 months, it was pretty difficult to find any continuity across these initiatives. And this again put quite a lot of like pressure on delegates themselves, because basically everything was discussed in the forums. You might have periods or weeks where there's like 5 or 10 different proposals that are being discussed. And basically delegates were kind of expected to oversee everything, which of course like could be compared to almost a full-time job with the amount of hours had to be put in. And then because of the amount of proposals that were up on the forum, you basically, or as a delegate, you were constantly like facing like lobbying pressure. And then I think the third point I want to bring up is the kind of amount of love the Treasury itself got in the beginning, which was basically zero. So there was no kind of long-term financial thinking or any thoughts about like basically diversifying away from anything else than ARB. And yeah, basically back in the day, all of the initiatives were funded through what I call just-in-time liquidity, meaning when an initiative was kickstarted, the Arbitrum or the ARB tokens would be converted then into like a cash or cash-like asset and then fund the initiative. And yeah, kind of what the impact of this was, that it was in the beginning quite difficult to attract any talent because you wouldn't know how long you would actually be able to work with the DAO. And you had to go through this like very frictious governance process basically, which also then sometimes led to like proposal gridlocks, because yeah, everything had to be defined so rigorously, and you had like hundreds and hundreds of counterparties you had to speak with, which made it such that it became basically difficult to like push anything through. And yeah, lack of synergistic execution. I think I already kind of talked about this, but not that many initiatives worked well together as a whole. And then the graph I have here is just to show that like until the beginning of 2025 of the total treasury, like ARB as a percentage of the total treasury, it never dipped below 95%. So the exposure directly to ARB was very high. And this just means that like even small price fluctuations in the underlying token means that the treasury value can like turn around quite a lot. And the problem with this is also that it is very difficult with investors or for an investor to kind of reason what the spending will look like over the next year or 2 years, or I should rather say what the float will look like of the underlying tokens, because you might suddenly 1 month have a proposal that floats a lot of ARB tokens into the market, basically. So I think this was one of the major changing points for the DAO. It's called the Arbitrum Aligned Entities vision, which basically kind of changed the way the DAO operates and pushes through initiatives. The vision basically defined 5 different entities as the, let's say, core contributors who each own their own like delivery areas. And these comprise us as in Entropy Advisors, off-chain, previously off-chain labs, doing engineering product partnerships, the Arbitrum Gaming Ventures, which is basically a gaming fund spun up by the DAO. Then we have the Arbitrum Foundation doing educational and technical advancements, working as DAO legal wrapper, as well as then doing marketing and kind of back office functions. And most recently OPCO, which basically works kind of as a bridge between then delegates and these like contributing entities. And I think it's important to highlight that delegates still like have full control over the treasury itself, so they need to like approve all of the proposals that want to withdraw any funds or approve, for example, this higher level AAE engagement. So the delegates' role has more turned into like high level watchers and basically people who push forward a vision for the DAO without having to like be a part of every single day-to-day operational decision. So I think where we're at right now, kind of what the results of this change have been, is that the DAO now has 2 new diversified revenue streams. The first one being Time Boost, which is basically an auction-based express lane that allows the DAO to capture MEV or internalize some of the MEV proceeds that happen on the transaction layer, but I'll go into that a bit more further down the presentation, as well as then we've actually started doing like active treasury management, which has been a big development for the DAO when it comes to like both activating idle capital to make it compound, as well as then stabilizing kind of the, let's say, runway of the DAO. Another big difference has been fiscal discipline, as well as, I guess I already talked about the multi-asset treasury, but now since all of the, or most of the initiatives that get pushed forward are as a result of an AAE, I'd say that initiatives are much more targeted and maybe better budgeted than they were previously, where the DAO was spending quite a lot of capital on a quarterly basis. And then I guess where the ecosystem is right now, we're still kind of the leading L2, becoming more and more the home of RWAs with especially tokenized money market funds, as well as then tokenized equities. And I think you could argue that Arbitrum really is a prime destination for enterprises as well as stratified partners, most recently with the Robinhood kind of partnership that was announced, and their chain is going to be launching soon, built with like Arbitrum technology. So when it comes to these diversified revenue streams, the first one is active treasury management, and the way the kind of treasury management portfolio is structured is it's managed through the ATM committee, which comprises, again, Entropy Advisors, as well as the Arbitrum Foundations, who custodies all the funds, as well as deploys them. and the deployments are made based on suggestions that Entropy Advisors makes to a committee called the OAT, who then either approve or reject that suggestion. If it gets approved, then deployment, of course, happens. It's a $100 million portfolio right now, comprising RWAs, ETH and ETH correlated assets, as well as then stable coins. Most recently, we deployed into USDAI, which was basically a big ecosystem growth play. And this kind of comes to the point that the Treasury management portfolio, or the Treasury management portfolio's mandate is kind of twofold, which is both growing the ecosystem as well as then maximizing risk-adjusted returns. But kind of rule number one is don't lose any capital. So this is more of a stable or safe haven for assets, let's put it that way. We're deployed across DeFi protocols. We're doing covered calls. We hold tokenized money market funds. So both a mix of on-chain and off-chain kind of deployment places. I think the target state for this would be to start covering expenses or recurring expenses with pure yield without actually spending down the portfolio. And then the kind of second diversified revenue stream or new revenue stream I wanted to talk about is Time Boost, which was launched in April 2025. And basically, previously, how the Arbitrum one-chain sequence transaction was on a first-in, first-out basis. But Time Boost basically kind of replaces that, or it doesn't replace it, but it introduces something called an express lane, which any entity can basically bid on. It's a sealed bid, second price action, and the winner of that bid receives a 200 millisecond advantage over anyone else on that chain. And yeah, basically allows the DAO to internalize some of the MEV revenue. And the chart here, I think, shows pretty well that these new revenue streams have kind of enabled the DAO to stabilize its top line because, yeah, in recent months, for example, even while transaction fees have kind of started trending downwards, these two new revenue streams have stayed relatively stable and in April made up 60% of the total gross profit of the DAO. Then when it comes to the fiscal discipline and multi-asset treasury part, I think I'll start with the DAO's token holdings right now. At the end of 2024, the DAO did already by itself run a program that basically diversified some ARB holdings into tokenized money market funds. But last year, it was taken kind of forward with the basically initiation of the ATMC committee, who again did another round of basically diversification into tokenized money market funds, but also increased the DAO's stablecoin holdings, which has then allowed the kind of this part of the portfolio to stay more stable. And even as the wider market has kind of gone down, this provides some runway stability from that point of view. The other part is this fiscal discipline portion of this slide, I guess, which just shows that if you look at the beginning expenses from the fourth quarter of 2023 until the third quarter of 2024, the DAO was spending around 20 to 40 million on incentives on a quarterly basis. So it's a logarithmic chart. And we were basically able to redesign the incentive program in such a way that this large spending isn't even necessary anymore. And I think we've been able to kind of maybe produce even better results with a smaller budget. And this brings me to the DRIP, which is basically the DeFi Renaissance Incentive Program, which is the DAO's new incentive program, which was designed by, again, Entropy Advisors with help from the Arbitrum Foundation as well as OCL. It's an 80 million ARB incentive program, which is cut into 4 separate seasons, and each season is targeting a very specific activity. Season 1 ended in February or mid-February, and basically was fully targeting money market activities. So specifically looping both ETH and stablecoin assets. So the user would deposit, for example, LSTs or LRTs or yield-bearing tokens, and then loop that trade up. We made a decision to kind of work very closely with a lot of issuing partners as well as money markets themselves to build up this program, and we're adjusting it continuously throughout the program's life cycle, which I think was a big part of why it has been so kind of successful. I think historically a lot of like incentive programs have mostly been looking at like TVL growth on its own, which I think is misleading because TVL growth is basically driven a lot by the current market environment. So you kind of need to adjust the TVL growth on your own chain with how your market share is also changing. So like if your TVL grows throughout the program, but your market share compared to like your competitors stays flat, then you can basically argue that the incentive program didn't have any impact because the total market just grew. And this is kind of what the adjusted cost effectiveness metric here tries to capture. So on the left-hand graph, I guess you can see that even though we only spent around 4 million on season 1, we achieved around a 51x cost effectiveness metric, which just means basically kind of how much TVL penetration you have gotten per dollar spent on this incentive program. And then the last point I wanted to mention is because of how the program I think was designed, it has also led to like quite sustainable results in a way where we grew the yield-bearing stablecoin market on Arbitrum specifically from around like 200 million at the beginning of September when the program was started to our 1.2 billion around at its peak. And even though the market has recently been pretty choppy, the market cap has still stayed around like 750, 800 million, which is a 3x increase compared to when the program was started. And that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you very much for your time.